everyone. It's Megan Ramos here with another episode of the Fasting Method podcast. Today, I'm joined by my lovely co-host, Dr. Nadia Pataguana. Nadia, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Super excited about today's guest.
We have a very special guest with us, and Nadia and I sought out to keep this a very fasting-oriented podcast, and we are doing just that with today's guest. He is someone who's very close to both Nadia and I, who I've had the pleasure of knowing for a long time, and I'm so grateful now to be able to call him my colleague for the last few years. I'd like to welcome Coach John Clary to our episode today. John, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Megan. Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to join today.
It's crazy because I can see you on video right now. We record on Zoom as well as 5 or 6 other things. And I'll never forget meeting you in person for the first time. Of course, I had met you through Facebook and the fasting community, and you were such a huge supporter of, we were IDM at the time, intensive dietary management, but a huge supporter of that. You embodied everything from the obesity code, and it was so great to connect with you online. And then my husband and I, we were visiting his family in Orlando, Florida, because that's where he was born and raised. And another gentleman from our Facebook world, Peter Kay, he lived in Daytona Beach, and he invited us over. And so I show up with my husband and my dog, who proceeded to pee as soon as we walked into Peter's lovely home. But then to my surprise, Pete had surprised me by inviting you, and you had made the long trip from Virginia down to Florida, and we got to really connect in person. It was such an honor to meet you. But I've got to say, John, since I met you all those years ago now, and it feels like forever ago, I can see you, and you look 10 years younger than you did 10 years ago. It's crazy. So everybody, we want to know stories. How did you get from point A to point B? How did fasting come into your lifestyle? How did diet come into your lifestyle? So we want to kick things off today by sharing your story, John. So we'd love to hear you talk about your evolution. What has you here today looking like you're 35 years old?
Well, thank you, Megan. I was a chubby kid, and then a fat and obese teenager, and then just continued into adulthood. And I tried all kinds of different things to lose weight. And, like a lot of people, you try a diet, and you have some success, you take off 20 pounds, 50 pounds, 100 pounds, and then it all comes back. And that just happened to me over and over and over. And I was always looking for a solution. As I aged, I was still around 400 pounds. I got up to 424 at my highest weight. I'd become type 2 diabetic. I had blood pressure. I had the whole package deal of metabolic syndrome. I was on 9 different medications. My doctor told me that I needed to go on insulin. I knew that wasn't going to be a good thing. And I was just searching online for some answers, and I was trying different ways of eating, and I stumbled across Whole30 and paleo, and that helped me make some changes. And then somebody talked about this doctor who talked about fasting, and that was Dr. Fung. And I went to his blog, and I thought, this makes sense. And the obesity code had just come out, so I got a copy of the obesity code and started reading it. And honestly, when I read it and learned about insulin resistance and insulin sensitivity, I realized that I had been fighting against my body for years. And I started doing what he said to do. In fact, I turned to the back of the book, and there's 2 chapters. One says what to eat, and the other one says when to eat. And I started eating a very low carbohydrate diet, which made it a lot easier for me to start skipping some meals. And I started skipping some meals. I started fasting right then, the next day. I remember in the book, he said, if hunger comes in waves, if you get hungry, just push through. The hunger will go away. It'll come back again later. So that's what I did. And that was the beginning of my fasting career. My first 3 months, I took off about 40 pounds, but more importantly, I normalized my blood glucose. So I was able to get off my meds for my type 2 diabetes and my statin and my medication for acid reflux and one of my blood pressure medicines. Within a year, I had a normal A1C. I've had a normal A1C ever since, and that was 2016. I got off the rest of the medications. I got off my CPAP. I've lost a total of 225 pounds now, and I've been at the same weight for about 2 years now. And as you said, I met you, I guess it was 2016, 2017. And that's when we started the Facebook group. And I told you that I was interested in coaching because that was kind of what I was doing in the group to a large extent. And so I've been a full-time coach with the fasting method for about 3.5 years now. And it's been very gratifying to help other people on their journey and help them find solutions to a lot of times problems that have been around for a long time.
Unlike Megan, I actually, John, don't remember exactly when we met. But what I do remember, I was talking about you to my husband yesterday, who I think you've met as well. He remembers you. What I do remember is that since I've met you, because we've seen each other at various work events and conferences, I've gotten an opportunity to watch part of your journey at least. And it's been, the visible part of it. Of course, it's amazing to hear you say you got off all these meds. And it's pretty amazing to hear you say that you've actually maintained all of that for 2 years, because I think that that's one of the things that people most worry about. And so you are not only are now diabetes expert and weight loss expert, but a maintenance expert, which is really what people want to hear, right? And that's the kind of coach that people want. So anyway, congratulations on that. And I actually said just that to my husband, like, you would not believe it. This guy looks 20 years younger. I'm going to say something that Daisy, our editor, might want to edit out at some point, but I'm going to say it anyway. I'm going to keep being Nadia. So I'm going to say it anyway. But I said to my husband, this guy is having major success in his professional life and a personal life, getting a whole lot of coaching clients, because I think most of the women just want to date him and most of the men just want to be like him. And, I won't go on about your personal life, although I know you're doing really, really well as well. But you really look great. And I know it isn't all about the looks, but you look super healthy. And it's been amazing because some of our coaches, I didn't get to see their journey, right? Their healing journey, because most of them had, joined sort of our program once they already reached their goal. And you joined in the midst of it because, you were at a much better place. And so it's been amazing to see even that part of the journey. But anyway, I do have some questions for you that I might, if the time permits. I'm really, really into sexual health, right? Men's health and women's health. And I know that you are, one of our experts on that topic, particularly when it comes to men's health. So I'm going to want to have the opportunity. I know we do work together. We do see each other at events and especially Zoom events now, but I would love to talk to you a little bit about that topic as well.
Yes, go ahead. Go right ahead.
Well, Megan, what do you think about that at this point? Should we ask John a little bit about his experience with men's health, or do you want to move on to something else?
Yeah, no, let's jump into it. At the Fasting Method podcast, there's really a place for everybody, men and women. And we do spend a lot of time talking about female health issues, but there are a lot of men out there that are listening too. And there are a lot of women out there that are listening for their brothers, nephews, partners, and they want to help them too. And how is fasting different for men? What is the reach? We talk all about the great reach of benefits for fasting for women, but what outside of weight loss can men expect in terms of fasting? So there's nobody, we talk about how young John looks and how great his transformation, but the thing that I think really sets John apart is that you can look at him and say, this guy is thriving. We talk about people losing weight, and we talk about skinny fat and, how slender people are more at risk. And you can see it. You can see someone who is slender, who is not thriving. But John is just totally thriving. And like you, I've just been so blown away to be able to be part of observing this transformation. So Nadia, hop right in. Let's talk about men's health.
Actually, I think that would be the first question, I think. Generally, John, you've had the opportunity to work with all these men. We normally talk to women. I talk to women. I have a Women in Fasting masterclass, Q&A series every Monday, 2 weekly meetings for women in fasting. But I know that you get to do that with men. We do have a lot of men in our community, thankfully. I've actually enjoyed quite a bit over the last 20 years of having worked with men. And I've worked with many men. I've had many men as patients and many as coaching clients. Not so much in the meetings, right? The large group meetings. But I know that in my coaching experience, I had a lot of men. Men liked my approach, of course, because I'm very direct and practical and whatnot. But I know that now, and you have for the last few years, you've worked a lot with our program on our men's health aspect of things. So I'd just love to hear from you generally what your experience has been like, some of the things that you have worked with people on, what their feedback has been like, etc.
We know that insulin is a problem. For those of us that have extra body fat, there's some insulin resistance that goes along with it, some high levels of insulin. So we know we have that hormonal problem, but there's the problem with estrogen and testosterone also. Most people think of estrogen as being the female hormone and testosterone being the male hormone, but actually both sexes have both hormones in different quantities. What happened to me, and this is based on the tests that I had done when I was new in I call it my recovery, is I had so much body fat that I was producing a lot of estrogen. And I had my testosterone levels checked. The levels were okay. They weren't great, they were okay. But my estrogen levels, or estradiol levels, were off the charts high. So in effect, it was canceling out my testosterone. And this was a big problem because the higher levels of estrogen meant that I would store body fat more like a woman, really, in my legs and in my hips, in my lower body. And then there's the side effects of having lower levels of testosterone, which include reduced sex drive, erectile dysfunction, sometimes hair loss, losing muscle, feeling tired all the time, appetite problems, just feeling crappy all the time. My typical days were just spent coming home from the office, getting some food, and sitting in the recliner for the rest of the night. After I had my levels checked and after I started losing body fat, it took some time, but slowly my estradiol levels lowered. As I burned off the body fat, I wasn't secreting as much estrogen, and my testosterone levels kind of bounced back. And that built on itself. And I think that's one of the major factors that let me continue to feel good and take off the weight loss, or continue the weight loss. You know, men tend to store fat in their belly, and that often indicates some visceral fat too. So you've got the visceral fat in your body cavity, around your organs, and then that's pushing out your belly as well. So just losing the body fat inside the body cavity just gave me some improved metabolic health, and the success just built on itself. I feel like, you know, even though I'm in my 60s now, I really feel like I'm in my 20s now. I feel better than I ever felt my whole life. And I'm active again. You know, it's nothing for me to go out and walk 5 or 10 miles a day without even stopping. It's really gratifying to have good health for once, and for this to be something that's been lasting. You know, it took me 5 years to take off the weight. But I've said that if you told me that at the beginning, it was going to take 5 years, well, you know what, the time's going to go by anyway. So if I hadn't taken off the weight, I don't know where I would have been. I couldn't have stayed 400 pounds, diabetic, high blood pressure, all those conditions for a long time. So I'm grateful that I found the answers for me, which was cutting out the foods that cause a big insulin response, and adding some fasting to give my pancreas a break. And that was really, that's really how it all started. And that's how it continues. And I just have not gone back to the old habits. Eating real food is really satisfying. And I don't have the desire to go back to the ways of eating and the foods that made me sick.
That is just amazing. So we were saying you look 20 years younger, but you actually feel 40 years younger. And it shows, right? So Megan and I have talked about this a lot because we were both clinicians, right? In office, in clinic, and we worked with men a lot. And men, one-on-one with their clinicians, will talk about some of the concerns that you mentioned, but they have a really hard time talking about it on the internet or in a more of a group setting. So I'm really glad that they have somebody like you to come to, and to, of course, as well as their clinicians and whatnot. But it's really important, I think, for men to hear this from other men. you know? And of course, my husband has been on his own journey. You guys have watched his journey as well with, you know, weight loss. And these are the things that men want to hear, they want to see, especially when they're starting out their journey. They want to see people like you, people like my husband, who, you know, look real great. And I remember embarrassing my husband when I was doing one of my presentations at one of the conferences, because I showed a picture and then I think I blushed and I went, well, he looks great and whatnot. And I think people just inferred exactly all the things that you're sharing with us. And that's really, really great. But it's important. I think it's really important for men to hear this. We women talk about things all the time. I was just in a group with women talking about urinary incontinence, for God's sake. We will talk about anything. But men have a really hard time, and they really need to know and hear it from other men. They need to know what to do and how to do it and where they're going. So I really appreciate it, John. I actually don't have any specific questions about that, because I think you answered all the things that I was thinking about and wanted to hear. Megan?
Yeah, no, it's so important to understand that all of these sex hormones, it's all about finding a balance between them. And women have slightly different balances than men, but we all have many of the same sex hormones. And when those balances are out of whack, then our systems become out of whack. It makes it very difficult to lose weight, makes it very easy to gain weight, and it can lead to metabolic related conditions. So I think your comments about estrogen dominance being something that men suffer from too, and just your willingness to talk about it really reduces a lot of the stigma. So I appreciate this conversation. And that's why I so appreciate your men in fasting groups, like not only your coaching groups that you do, but your groups within the community that focus on men in fasting. But something else that you do in the community too, that I think Nadia commented on, like you are the king of maintenance, and you host some special events to talk about life after weight loss, because we deal with it every day. We get the panic. How do I maintain? How do, I'm 10 pounds away from my goal. How do I maintain? What do I do? There's a lot of panic because for so many of us, all we know that comes after weight loss is regaining weight. So there's a huge fear there. And then there's also a big emptiness too, because so many people, weight loss has become their habit. From teenagers, they go on their first diet, or after university, they, try to lose that freshman 15 that never quite comes off and snowballs. It becomes a big part of our spare time is trying to figure out weight loss and these health strategies to help us lose weight. So you focus on some really key things in the life after weight loss journey for optimization. So I'd love to hear some of the top topics that you discuss in your groups and your presentations, John.
Well, we have talked about maintenance in the life after weight loss webinars. People do have a concern about regain, because that's happened to me in the past. It hasn't happened this time. Now, sure, there's been slips, and everybody's going to slip. And I'm working on a talk right now about relapse and slips. We talked in our program a lot about progress, not perfection. Perfection is the enemy of good. And it's easy to have a slip and figure, well, I already blew it today. I might as well go ahead and eat the junk the rest of the day or all weekend long, and I'll start again on Monday. And then Monday turns into the first of the month. And then, before you know it, sometimes months or even years have gone by before you get back to it. So I think it's important to figure out some strategies to help handle those situations. And I'm a real fan of keeping a journal, and it doesn't have to be anything fancy, but I think it's a good idea to have a contingency plan written down. What are you going to do when the time comes that you're having trouble? If it's a slip or you go into a full-fledged relapse and you start to gain weight again, what are you going to do to get back on track? So that's your contingency plan. But then if that happens, I think it's a good idea to write about that as well. Call it a post-mortem. What happened? Why did this happen? What were the circumstances? How was I feeling? How might I handle that situation differently? What am I going to do if it happens again, or when it happens again? Because slips are just a normal thing. We're trying to put habits into place that'll be systems to not just get us to our goal, but to help us maintain our goal and just make that our lifestyle now. And I think that's one reason that I've been successful with my maintenance, is because I have the habits in place. And I haven't gone back to the old habits. For me, it's like the memory of how bad it used to be is strong enough that it keeps me from going back to it. But I think it's important to try and stay positive. Don't beat yourself up if something happens, because it's not an all or nothing thing. If you snack or you break your fast early or you eat something that isn't going to help you with your goals, it doesn't mean that you suck and you ruined everything. It was just that was a point in time. You learn from it, and remember that it's about making progress and not being perfect. And another thing that you could journal about is, why are you doing this? Are you doing it to lose weight? Are you doing it to improve your health? Are you doing it to be happier? For me, it was all those things. I started off because I wanted to reverse my diabetes. And I've said before that the weight loss was like a side benefit. And really, that was the case. But it took improving my insulin resistance, my insulin sensitivity, to be able to lose weight. And it started off slow at first, and then it just kept happening. Then the habits that I put into place just made it a normal thing. And then it was like one day, it's like, wow, I'm at my weight loss goal. I think I'm done now. As far as the weight loss goes. Then another thing that I think is really important is get some support, because, well, that's how I met you, Megan. That's how I got connected with what became the fasting method. Is after I read the obesity code, I was so excited to have found something that was starting to work for me, and I wanted some support. And that's what led me to find one of your clients who had started a little Facebook group, and I started off as a moderator in that group, and it just snowballed from there. I gave up the food, and I felt like I replaced it with support. And I feel lucky that I'm in that situation where I'm giving support now instead of just getting it, although I certainly get a lot out of giving the support. You got to give it away to keep it, they say.
I think that's amazing to hear you say that in your men's health groups, you actually encourage and remind people about the importance of journaling. This is something that we talk a lot about in our women's groups. So I'm really happy to hear you say that, because it is super powerful. And I'm happy to hear that men are really open to this too, and are starting to learn the benefit of that, because I do think that it's a great, wonderful tool. But you have a lot of great tips and tricks with your own experience. I do remember when you were the moderator for that Facebook group, and you were amazing because you were hilarious for sure. You know, you were very supportive of people then, and you are now, of course, in your coaching. So you had great training for that just from being in the Facebook group. I remember that you always had the funniest but spot on answers for people in the Facebook group.
I think one of John's greatest gifts is that he can really take something that can feel so overwhelming and really just explain it in a way that makes it feel easy. Like there's a step-by-step approach. And part of, John sharing his own journey, days off plan happen. Holidays off plan happen. They happen. You carry on. And from all of my years coaching, being in the clinic, being involved in our community, it's really that mentality that leads someone to the success that John has had and that John is helping other people find. And it's really that spirit, within John that enables him to help so many people actually reach their goals and become our king of maintenance, of the fasting method, and take them the rest of the way, to really optimizing their health and really enabling them to thrive. Now, something that I know we've talked about in our community, but also amongst our incredible team of coaches, is John in recent years made another change that led to some significant transformation. And I believe this change was cutting out the booze, cutting out the alcohol, and just really thriving so much. And I think that people in general, men and women, feel a lot of social pressure when it comes to around alcohol. I will often joke, it's not even really a joke, I'll say it in a jokingly way, that my friends are okay with me not eating, but not drinking makes them uncomfortable in my age demographic. And I'll make this comment and I'll hear from other community members that they're experiencing the same thing. They feel very pressured, especially on those warm summer nights, sitting on the back patio with friends to have a drink. So, John, I'd love for you to talk about what has your experience been? What have you benefited from kicking the alcohol to the curb? And how do you handle these social situations that come up?
Well, yeah, I think I did what some people do when you give up something, like you give up compulsive overeating, like I did. I gave up the food. There was some transference, and I think that there were times where I drank more than I used to. And I decided to do one of those dry January programs where you just don't drink for the whole month of January. And that was January 2020, right before COVID, right when everybody started drinking more. But I did that, and I was amazed, like within a few days, how much better my sleep got and how much better I felt. And then I learned more about oxidative priority. I mean, most of us know now that if you eat carbs, your body's going to burn off the carbs before it burns off anything else. But what I didn't realize is that if you drink an alcohol, your body's going to burn off the alcohol first before it burns off any food at all that you eat with it. And cutting out the alcohol that month of January 2020, I saw my weight loss increase, because I've been at kind of not really a plateau, but the weight loss had definitely slowed. And I've got a chart I keep of my weight loss. I've been weighing myself for years on a regular basis. And the chart just shows when I gave up the alcohol, the weight loss just zoomed, and it got me right to my goals. And I felt so good that I just have never picked it up since then. I really don't miss it at all. It's kind of like when I talk about nachos and donuts and Captain Crunch and things like that. I know that those things made me sick, and I feel so much better without them. And it's the same way with the alcohol. It's like it made me sick, and I do better. I feel better without it. And really, it's not a problem at all for me to have given it up. I don't feel deprived in any way. And I think that's one reason why my health is so good today. All my markers are excellent, all my blood markers. And even my doctor says, man, you look so healthy. And my doctor has asked me for help in treating his other male patients, how to help them. It's gratifying just for me to have come from a place where I thought, okay, well, this is my life now. I'm an old man. I just I watch TV in the recliner every day and eat. And now my life is like 180 degrees different from that. I feel vital and I feel active. I feel like I'm making a difference in the world, and I'm happier than I've ever been. So I'm always happy to help other people do it, men or women. And one thing I really like about working with the men in the fasting program is that they have somebody that understands. They have somebody that's been there and knows what it feels like. And it doesn't take a lot to get people to open up and talk. Men have a reputation for not talking about their feelings, and certainly not doing things like journaling or going to support groups. But once you can crack that door open a little bit and give them some understanding and a safe place, it makes a difference.
I'm really glad we're actually talking about this topic of alcohol, John, and thanks for sharing that. I think a lot of people would really benefit from this information. See, I'm not a big drinker, so it's always really hard for me to tackle this topic with my clients because I feel like I might have a lot of professional experience with it, but it's always something that people want to hear from somebody who's sort of gone through that. So I really appreciate this, because I must tell you that in my 20 years of doing this, alcohol is always an obstacle. And so we're always sort of almost tiptoeing around this topic, right? Because we're always getting into this moderation sort of approach, right? Oh, drink in moderation. What does that mean? It's the same thing when it comes to carbs or sugar, processed food, calories. It just does not work for some people. And I've seen in a lot of my clients this that you speak about, this transition often at the beginning of going from eating a lot of processed stuff, a lot of sugar, to transitioning to actually drinking a lot more. And so it's important that people sort of know, okay, where to go from here, and am I going to be able to do it? And I think what John is saying, and very well, is that you can do it. And John has done it. He's a great example. I do see a lot of men in my groups, by the way, my community meetings. I just don't think that they speak a ton because the ladies take over, but they are there.
At the end of the day, we all have the same goal, men and women, and we can all learn a lot from one another. And I think that there's this huge stigma out there too about like just weight loss being so brutally hard for women compared to our male counterparts. And one of the great things about fasting is that men and women can have these parallel journeys. For women, weight loss tends to be a little bit slower at the start, and men tends to be a little bit more extravagant at the start. But, after a good 6 to 8 weeks of consistent practice, men and women tend to get the same results. So this is where it's really great for people to come together with members of the opposite sex and do this together. You just have to maybe do a few deep breaths if you're a lady, for the first month or first couple of months, but you can really experience this journey together. And so many of the hurdles that men have, women also have with fasting as well. And I think, that's part of the reason why Nadia sees so many men in her groups, even though they're not necessarily dedicated to men and fasting, is because at the end of the day, we struggle with work stress. We struggle with emotional eating. We struggle with boredom eating. We struggle with being on vacation. This is something I was just away for a long weekend, and there's still these old habits, but it's a vacation. I should have dessert. And it's just like, Megan, no, like smack my own head. Like, you don't want it, but it's those habits of having that ingrained in you for 30 some odd years before you start to make lifestyle changes. And my husband did the same thing. So, he's a 33-year-old guy. I'm going to be a 38-year-old lady this year, but we go through the same things. He felt compelled to have a drink on the patio. So did I. Okay. We were supporting each other in that journey because we don't really want it. We're going to drink it and not enjoy it. And we're going to feel awful afterwards. So there's so many parallels. And I think something that often stops men and women from coming together when weight loss is the ultimate goal is because we don't think that we can relate. And one of I will often joke with people too about when I'm mad at my husband, often his greatest redeeming quality is that he lives the same lifestyle as I do, because I know how difficult it would be to try to find someone else that goes along with all of this stuff. My husband's an incredible guy, but we both can irritate each other, I'm sure. So I'll make this joke, but after our wedding, we decided that we just didn't want to hit certain target goals on paper. We really wanted to optimize our health. And it was so great to be able to do the journey together. And despite working with all types of men and women in the clinic, it was really cool to do it with him because I realized just how much in common our journeys actually had when I thought that they would be so different because I was a woman and a little bit older and he was a younger male. But, our journeys were the same, our problems, our hurdles were the same. And I think that that's something that is so great about our community is that people can come, they have this space, this platform to talk about it, and they can really learn from each other that, hey, we can all do this together. We can do this fasting thing and we can get results.
I actually quite agree with that, not just from my own experience with my husband. We've totally been doing this together for the last 10 or so years. But I find that probably the reason, John, why so many men come into my meetings is because they actually want to hear what all these ladies have to say. Even though, of course, men and women's journeys are slightly different, we have different hormones, or at least we should, we can definitely learn a lot from each other. And I have definitely enjoyed seeing and hearing the men that when they do speak with me, whether it's in, one-on-one coaching or the few times that they'll write something in the chat in one of my meetings or actually speak up and tell me how they're doing. I really like the fact that they're obviously getting something out of being in these groups with ladies as well. So that's super. We can definitely learn from each other. Today, actually, I was talking about a few things when I was telling you guys about the urinary incontinence, when somebody was talking about, we can learn so much from, even though we have these different expressions, we can make some parallels.
So, John, at the end of every expert guest episode, we love our guests to share their 3 top tips for someone who's in the beginning of their journey, someone who's in the middle of their journey and might have hit a plateau, and one for someone who's at the end of their journey thinking about life after weight loss. And then there's no more perfect expert than you to chat about all of these stages. So John, we'll throw it over to you for your 3 tips.
Well, I think the first thing is to get your physical hunger under control, because if you're physically hungry all the time, it's hard to override that. And that's what I learned from reading the obesity code. I came away with a feeling like, now I understand it wasn't all my fault. I mean, yes, I put those foods into my mouth, but I was driven to eat them because of the nature of the foods I was eating. So I say, clean out the pantry and stock it up. Get rid of the foods that are going to be getting in your way, foods that are generally high carbohydrate processed foods, and replace them with foods that are primarily protein and fat. And for me, that was foods like hard-boiled eggs, macadamia nuts, pre-cooked bacon, canned sardines, things that are easy to go to, so that if I was going to eat, I would have something that was going to help me get to my goal instead of move away from it. Then the other thing is to cut out the snacking. That's how you can get started in the fasting. So that's number 2, is cut out the snacking. Just eat real meals 2 or 3 times a day. Eat a meal that lasts maybe 60 minutes, maybe 90. 60 is really a long time to be eating a meal, I think, if you're just sitting at the table eating. So start eating real meals, no snacking. And then the third part is to start adding actually some fasting. So start cutting out some meals, get yourself to a point where you're getting some time in ketosis, which is, it'd be at least 18 to 20 hours at a stretch. If you want to do extended fasts, that'll work. If you want to do shorter fasts, like maybe 36, 42, 48-hour fasts, just find some way to get a fasting protocol into your life. It doesn't have to be totally strict and something that you have to do every day for the rest of your life, but you have to make some changes, because you're not going to be able to get different results doing what you're doing now.
This was really great, John. This was gold. I love how practical your tips are.
Thanks. Yeah, it works for me, and that's what I try to impart to people. You know, it's not magic. It's just working with your body, and once you get that physical hunger under control, you can work on all the other reasons you eat, right? Happy, sad, lonely, tired, bored.
Thank you so much, John. We really appreciate it. We're so grateful to call you our friend and our colleague, and love just being part of your journey and having you be part of ours. So thank you so much for joining us for today's podcast. We can't wait to have you back on and talk about more hot topics like maintenance and men and fasting, and really sort of, I think, simplifying strategies, because we're all just trying to make this as sustainable as possible. And I think a lot of people are trying to overcomplicate it just way too much, and that's where they're hitting some serious roadblocks. And I just love your whole take on literally everything, from meal timing to fasting to nutrition. You really have so many strategies that can make this sustainable. So thank you again for joining us, and everybody who's listening, happy fasting.
Bye, everyone.
Take care. Bye.